The key thing that changed was the mission and the size of the impact that I wanted to have. Right. So I was doing wedding filmmaking and photography. Right. And there was a real mission and a reason to why we were using story, why we felt like this was the most important thing, like capturing the day that happens once, for clients that, they would literally fly me in and the team from all over the world. There was maybe 4 or 5 of us. The budgets were growing and they're getting bigger. There were five-figure budgets, associated to these films. And they were getting really creative with the approach. But I started to turn around and think, I know, this is to myself. And it's like, I knew this is not where I want to be. This is not the type of work I'm dreaming of doing. It's not the impact that I also know I want to have. But I knew for where I wanted to go, which was creating works that started to change culture and be seen by thousands of people. I felt, honestly, as a young black man at the time, I couldn't go in via the approach that would normally be done.
Welcome to another episode of the Forever Podcast. It's your boy, it's your host, Jamar Jones. I am the founder of Forever Media. I'm also a national speaker and the author of the book, Change Your Circle, Change Your Life. In this podcast here, we talk about things that are business and things that are personal, because business is personal. And we're going to be getting into some slamming conversation here with a guest that I was actually following for quite some time on YouTube. I found him on YouTube. And as I was kind of learning about different ways to approach my company, and we were very heavily in video production at the time, and I actually stumbled across him on YouTube, and then I was really infatuated by his story, how he articulated ideas, how he kind of broke down how to do interviews, how to, increase your rates. And he just had a lot of great things that I could relate to as an entrepreneur. And so we started to connect, and we kind of just started to follow each other and just see each other's journey. And the things that he's doing now is absolutely incredible. And so I'm super honored and super excited to have our guest on the Forever Podcast, Simeon Query.
Thank you very much. I'm pleased to be here after I've been watching you as well so much on social media, and to be chatting with you is super cool. So great.
Yeah, I got a ton of questions, man, and I think first off and foremost, what you're doing with your company is everything what the world needs, because that's where things are going, because a lot of things are traditionally done the same for so many years, and no one really starts to say, hey, do we have to do it this way? Can we change the way we're doing this and change the way we look at education, change the way we're looking at learning? And so the way on how you've evolved your career and been able to now incorporate technology with education, with storytelling, is absolutely incredible. So let us know a little bit about what is going on in your world, and and who you are and what you got going on, because I got so many questions.
I love it. Thank you. So essentially for me, I really struggled with learning when I was growing up. For me as a kid, learning was very formulaic. You were copying from a whiteboard or a blackboard or a projector. It's giving away how old I am. I was struggling with writing and keeping my writing in between the lines. I wanted to take up 2 lines, not 1. And I just was constantly behind. My parents were worried. My teachers were worried. I had support teachers around me. My friends were off playing around in the playground whilst I still had to wait behind for 15, 20 minutes to finish off my work. And if you're
Yeah.
like 6 years old, that 15 minutes when you're not with your friends and you see them outside the window is a very, very long time. It turned out that really it wasn't so much that I was the problem, it's that the way that the education was given to me just didn't resonate with me. I realized that those lessons where it involved some interactivity, I was able to talk and communicate, but I struggled with the writing element. If it was too much reading, I struggled a little bit there. But when things had story in them as well, when they were creative, all of a sudden I got it. When I went to what we would call secondary school, so the second school after, I don't know what it is called in the States, but here in the UK, we call it secondary school, as
Okay.
a 11-year-old, just to give you an
Yeah.
age,
Oh, okay. So that would
right?
be around middle school, probably.
Middle. All right,
Yeah.
middle. In middle school, listen to me now, talking the lingo. In middle school, I started to understand myself, and I started to, in some ways, hack myself, so that I could make sure that things worked for me. Right, so I'd kind of work twice as hard to kind of reformat, make the subject matter by thinking in terms of story, by making a subject that was maybe boring and traditional into something that was creative and interesting for me. Fast forward to what we now do, and where we've now ended up, is actually digging into a skill set that I gained and acquired and nurtured because of that younger version of myself, which is taking subjects that are maybe boring or very complex and adding and overlaying story, creativity, interactivity. And we do that for, at the moment, a lot of large organizations. In large organizations, people have to do training related to cybersecurity, they have to do education related to diversity inclusion. And to the everyday person like me or like your audience, some of those subjects don't naturally mean much. So, how do we get people to care? How do we get these subjects to resonate? Storytelling, interactivity, delivering things in a different way.
Yeah.
Uh,
I mean,
so that's what we've been doing.
yeah, it's and storytelling, it I mean, from way back in the day with I think cavemen, I mean, storytelling is how we get across any kind of message. And it's the most powerful way of communication because people can really see themselves in the story and they're able to relate to it. And I think so I want to talk about real quick your transition because um, when you first started, how was that like for you as an entrepreneur? You know, from doing video and then, you know, now kind of making that pivot or making that change from, hey, you know, video production, we do storytelling. And I mean, you've worked with also a number of clients in that space. And then you kind of said, hey, there's a lane here.
Yeah.
And and you it looked like you found it and you took it and you ran with it to really make it your own. But what was that transition like, especially as you starting out as an entrepreneur?
Okay. So, do you know the key thing that changed was the mission and the size of the impact that I wanted to have. Right. So,
Mm,
I was doing wedding filmmaking and photography. Right. And there was a real mission and a reason to why we were using story, why we felt like this was the most important thing, like capturing the, the day that happens once, for
yeah.
clients that, they would literally fly me in and the team from all over the world. There was maybe 4 or 5 of us. The budgets were growing and they're getting bigger. There were five-figure budgets, associated to these films, and they were getting really creative with the approach. But I started to turn around and think, I know, one, this is to myself, and I knew this is not where I want to be. This is not the type of work I'm dreaming of doing. It's not the impact that I also know I want to have. But I knew for where I wanted to go, which was creating works that started to change culture and be seen by thousands of people. I felt, honestly, as a young black man at the time, I couldn't go in via the approach that would normally be done. Because here in the UK, when it comes to certain forms of media production, there's a certain pedigree there that I couldn't immediately start to get involved in. My education
Mm,
didn't necessarily stack up because of that pathway that I had started on. It didn't necessarily match the destination. So I thought, I'm going to go the long way round. I'm going to make sure that I start where I know I can start. But when I do it, you're going to know I'm doing it because I'm going to do it totally differently. right? I'm still going to use storytelling.
Yeah.
I'm still going to deliver in a way that is totally unique, and I'm going to work with the standards that resonate with me, even though I'm in a goldfish bowl. I'm going to be a shark trying to fit in this what might be perceived as a smaller industry. And I say shark, but I mean it in a friendly way. A shark's friendly?
Yeah.
I'm not sure, but you get the principle. So as a result, we got recognized, right? Some of the large brands started to look at what we were doing and started to reach out and go, could you take your approach to storytelling and could you use it for this subject? I started to understand the impact of the subjects that we were starting to communicate for some of these organizations. So on the weekends, I was doing weddings. In the weekdays, we were editing the weddings, but we were also doing commercial shoots. And then a client said to me, who was a large organization, it was Unilever, who own a lot of big kind of brands related to food. Like I think they do Ben and Jerry's, Dove, and a few other like brands related to the household products. And he sat down with me and he said, look, you're doing the weddings, but your impact and your possibilities here are far greater, far bigger. Your thought process is really unique. And even though you've exercised that thought process here,
yeah,
follow through on your mission and scale it up. And so what we now started to do is I didn't look back. I started to think bigger. And so at first it was how can we take messages that are important and how can we deliver that impact larger? Then all of a sudden I started to think about society as a whole. I started to think about culture as a whole. And as a result, because I'm now thinking about the problem, I'm now then have to find a mission based on the problem, which meant that we needed to think bigger. We needed to act bigger. And as a result, you start to align yourself with, you change your circle, right? Your circle becomes bigger in order to facilitate that vision. And that tension that's there, because as you make your circle bigger or your impact bigger or your mission bigger, you have one foot in comfort and one foot where it's very, very uncomfortable. Right? That's part of that process of expanding that circle. And it's difficult, but I love being there. And that's the place that I always need to be, somewhere where it's just that slightly, little bit uncomfortable.
Yeah, I resonate with that 100%. I'm usually always just swimming and uncomfortable. I'm just just full strokes, swimming and uncomfortable. And but I love it though. I love challenging myself. I love seeing like what is possible. And that's where I think real innovation is bred. It's through figuring out how to make something impossible possible of a thought. And it's also kind of the cleverness of seeing what's out there currently today and how can you package that up a little bit differently. And I think that's exactly, what you've done because these resources are kind of, from the scale, they're all these resources are available to everybody. The difference is how you're packaging up and how you're having one receive it. And
Right.
that's from, the essence of everything that we do, especially visually and especially like creativity.
Right. So I want to jump off on that point. I think that so many will know I was video and photography. The moment I started thinking about mission and impact, the tool became superfluous. It was no longer important. When you start thinking about impact and mission, you then start to think, well, how can I be as effective as possible?
Mm-hmm.
What's going to help you fulfill that mission? So for me, I want to change the way people think and the way they feel about subjects that are really important. As an example, many who have Black heritage, like myself, working within large organizations or trying to get into organizations or progress in the workplace really struggle because the lived experience is filled with this drip of people saying the wrong thing, treating you in the wrong way, making wrong assumptions about you, and that starts to reframe how you think about yourself. And as a result, it almost sabotages you and where you are and others who are like you. So then we started to think, I want to start to work on helping that group, but also help organizations solve that problem. Now, as I started to think about storytelling and technology, I fell in love with virtual reality. So I learned VR, right? So learned 3D modeling, the technology behind the game engines, and started to utilize that. So that I started off by myself, and then I built the team, added to the video team, but then brought in 3D developers and engineers, and I learned the engineering myself. And then we created a VR experience where we place you in the body of a young black man for 7 minutes to experience what he's thinking in his home environment, listening to family. The telephone rings and it's his friend talking about that job opportunity, so that you, as someone who may not have the lived experience of being in my shoes, understand what it's like to be in their shoes or to be in my shoes, and then change the way you see the world as a result. The technology, that's not where I went first. The mission is where I went first. The purpose is where I went first. The impact is where I went first. And then you start to find ways of trying to solve the problem. When you start to try to solve a problem, that's when you start to innovate. Innovation doesn't mean it's something that's totally new. It just means you're looking at things and resources are available and creating these unique combinations in order to be able to create something that delivers on what you're trying to achieve.
Yes. That is incredible. 7 minutes inside of a
Oh, it's not a big deal for you, Jamal. It's not a big deal for you, right? Because you live like this.
For me, it's like, man, I'm living that life every day. But that, you know, what's incredible about that is that it puts, you know, everything in perspective. You know, I think that first, as you know, when we talk about, you know, the DEI kind of initiative, especially, you know, from 2020, especially here in the States, and then now in also globally, um, that really opened a lot of eyes to, especially a lot of people in within business, of DEI. And what I think that really, and a bunch of different conversations have been like spawned because of that. My philosophy is, yes, it's good to go deep into all those sectors of conversation, but first we need to learn and understand. So before we make a position and make a stance, before we even understand something, we need to look at ourselves and say, have I really spent some time to learn and understand? Before I put my stake in the ground and say, this is what I believe. Because we have to challenge that mindset. And so first it's just about the connection and understanding. So I've been now challenging a lot of people, especially in my talks, and when people are asking me questions, I'm like, first, just shut up and observe and ask questions. Don't take a position. Just ask questions and learn. And that's what I love about that experience, is that you get to experience something for 7 minutes, and that's only 7 minutes. And you get to just listen. You you can't really, I mean, you can interact, but you can't, you know, you can't state your position to that experience. You just have to experience it, which puts you in a position like, "Oh, that's unique. I didn't understand that before." And it widens that perspective, which is just so, it's so needed, because you need to do that first before we go into any further conversation. And I think that's where the misstep has happened with a lot of the other different conversations around it when you start to dig real deep, because they're not opening their hearts and their minds to kind of the new possibilities. And that's where it needs to happen first. And that's why I love what you're doing. And you're doing it in spaces where I feel it can grow. I mean, for even from cybersecurity, DEI, I mean, these are amazing experiences, but there's other industries that have just been known to have, you know, dinosaur like you know, experiences for their team. And it's time to reinvent that, reimagine that, and
Yes.
have them just explore something new. And honestly, it's going to hit them harder, and so the training is going to be able to be really soaked in that much more deeper into the fabric of the organization to be able to really make real change. And that's what I love about that, you know, putting in VR and then, you know, the experience, especially I know you're probably going to talk about the breakout rooms. And I mean, that is just awesome because it gamifies the experience and people learn through constantly doing and kind of progressing through something.
Thank you. Yeah, so you essentially touch on, again, as part of that mission, trying to think, okay,
Yeah.
so headsets are great, but they're also not always accessible, not always available. So how do we scale that up? So what we then started to do, you'll start to see shortly, we're creating some interactive 3D worlds that people will walk in the shoes. We've created something called In Their Shoes. So we create a character, an avatar, and you get to walk in the shoes of that character. The story's being crafted and created in collaboration with those with really powerful lived experiences that often get overlooked. And then the other thing we've done is we started to create these interactive, immersive escape rooms. So when I say immersive, I don't mean with virtual reality, but you get so immersed in the story that as a team, you go on in a group and you all of a sudden you get given this protagonist and you start to care for this protagonist, understand what makes this protagonist of Gloria, for example, what makes her tick, what are her challenges, where is she trying to get to? And what are those obstacles? And you live a period of time, maybe in a workshop as a group, interactively for an hour, walking in her shoes, helping, crafting, and all of that is, yes, gamified, in order to be able to scale up that safe space discussion. And Jamal, what you talk about, and I hear you mention this a lot. You use a very particular phrase when you talk about the circle. Can you give that to me again? You talk about the
Cha-
circle,
the change your circle, change your life.
right? The issue is that for many, the circle is always predictably the same.
Yeah.
Some don't get let into the circle, right? Some don't even see the other circles to be able to change the circle in the first
Correct.
place. The one that they need is over here, and they can't get there because they don't even see it. And
Right.
others see the circle and they go, hey, can I get involved? Can I come in? And they get, no, you don't look like me, don't sound like me, your network's not the same as me, and that creates that challenge. So trying to use that storytelling to help people, two sides, some understand the circles that are there, but then also make sure that those that are within certain circles go, hey, come on in, how can I help you? Right, this
Yeah.
is when we talk about culture change, is trying to find ways of scaling up that principle. And sometimes the technology can be a way of doing that, the storytelling can be a way of doing that. But it's really trying to think about that bigger mission, that has become really key, important to me, because this challenge is difficult. The technology can be difficult. Things can be expensive. You get sometimes you get barriers.
Yeah.
Working with large organizations is always a challenge in trying to get into the large organizations. But because the mission is key, it gives you the sense of resilience
Yeah.
that no matter what comes up, you keep moving forward. And eventually you look behind you and go, okay, wow, look how far we've come.
Yeah. Which is crazy as an entrepreneur because you put your idea out there and you're like, oh my God, it's working.
Yeah.
Like, holy crap. I mean,
Yeah.
it started here, but now it's living, it's breathing, it's vibrant. It has its own legs. It's moving on its own. I mean, it creates this like, wow, I contributed to that. I participated in that, and it's amazing as an entrepreneur. Um, how did you get let's go back a little bit because I want to just understand a little bit of your story. So, how did you get into this storytelling and like what was that like as kind of a kid and going into, figuring out what you wanted to do? Because a lot of people, unless you come from a family of entrepreneurship, um, you don't just, be like, I want to be an entrepreneur. That's not usually your first thing. I wanted to be a hip hop artist. That's what I wanted to be. And so entrepreneurship was not even on my radar whatsoever. So what does that beginning of that journey look like for you?
I think it's just realizing that there's something you want to do, and the framework for what you want to do doesn't necessarily exist in the right format for you, right? Because they're not, an organization may not be doing it the way you think it should be done. So I think some of it was just this spark of an idea. Yeah, some of it was because I have an imagination, and I love bringing the concepts and the imagination. I love bringing these things to life. Um, it was there from the beginning in some ways. It really was. I don't think I can pinpoint a particular point when it's like, right, that's when the penny dropped.
Okay.
I think it's always been there, where I would always find my own way and my own pathway through. Well, yes, I would pivot, which is essentially me going, actually, I'm now redefining my mission as this. I can have more impact in this way, or I've learned these different things. How does
Yeah.
this change my where either how I'm going to get to where I want to get to, or the impact I want to achieve, or has this adjusted and refined the destination slightly?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's about pivoting and learning, soaking in the knowledge, and that's what it sounds like. You're kind of like a sponge, and you kind of soaked
Yes.
up and then just learned and then said, "Hey, where do I want to go?" And then, at some point it clicked. You're like,
Yes.
storytelling is it, and then how do you then express
So I
storytelling?
think some of the storytelling element definitely came from when I was younger. Okay.
Yeah.
Um, Also, I think having a religious upbringing, I'm brought up
Okay.
in a very religious household, so you are taught stories. You're
Mhm.
taught, Sermon on the Mount. All of these other elements that you all of a sudden understand that stories have got that power to control how you think, adapt how you think, reposition how others think.
Yeah.
And so then without realizing it, there was that element of I see things differently. I was always had the ability to come up with an illustration or to go, oh, you're talking about this. So you actually mean it's a bit like this.
Yeah.
And then in school, when something was complex, the teacher would explain something and I would say, oh, so it's actually, you mean it's actually a bit like this,
Yeah.
right? So you might be brought up with illustrations like the wheat and the weeds. It's an
Yeah.
illustration. So,
Yeah.
oh, so it's like this. So instead of being someone who just documented something as it was, I was always going, oh, it's like this. And so that ended up becoming part of that creative pathway. So I would sit in front of a large bank or an organization and they would say, can you help our organization understand this particular subject? Because if
Yeah.
everyone understands this, this is going to be the impact. And I'd say to them, okay, I'm really sorry. I don't understand what that phrase means. Say that again for me. Okay. Say that again. Oh, it's like this.
It's like that, yeah.
And all
Yeah.
of a sudden, that would become an animation. That would become a story. That would become a such and such. Whereas others were simply documenting.
Yeah. So you're just looking for that one kind of phrase or that one thing that you can make it and say, "Hey, it kinda relates to this." Um,
Absolutely.
to
Absolutely. And
wrap
so look,
around a story around it.
and that all those in the audience, sometimes if you're just looking for something that makes you unique, that makes you different, it can be something that's very, very small. Something that's very small that just gives you a slightly different outlook on the world.
Mm.
And just that it's like not thought about that much until you asked me, right? Just that little bit there all of a sudden gave me a totally unique perspective
Yeah.
in terms of how we would look at a brief, how we would
Yeah.
communicate it, how we would convey the story. So where others, I'm working in a space, right? How do I end up sitting in the National Cybersecurity Center with those that are called spooks, right?
Yeah.
I.e., they're right, they're the secret agents. How do I end up sitting in that room as someone that truthfully doesn't have a background in
Yeah.
cybersecurity, right? And they're asking
Like,
me, they're asking me. I ended up being in a room with the three most senior security officers of the entire country responsible, right? And
wow.
then there, and I'm listening to the Ukraine, and I'm listening to this happening with Russia, and I'm listening to such and such. Like, how am I sitting in that room? And before I would always be trying to work out to be in that circle. I need to have the same expertise and knowledge as them. No, my skill set really is that I will look at something complex and go, I don't really understand that. I think it's like this.
Yes.
And that's the unique element that for me I have is I take things that are complex and I make them very simple and I place them in a way that works for the younger version of myself, Little Sim, which so happens to be often the way that the world needs the information. So it's almost like,
Yeah.
it's like being an ambassador, right? You're the intermediary between. And I often find that being that intermediary between two things, two status quos, two languages, two parties, often holds a lot of value.
So what you just described is what I call everybody has a superpower. And I'm a big comic book head, as you can see in the background. I love it. I love it. So I grew up on this stuff, but everybody has a superpower, and you were actually able to learn how to, first of all, learn that you have this superpower. A lot of people don't discover it. They're still searching, still searching. And the other part of it is you've actually learned how to apply it and what your true ability is. And then, so all the other things around it are just supportive of that one superpower. And that's where, for myself, I'm a creator and a connector, and I have certain abilities within those things that make me different and unique, and I know is my gift. And that, it's hard to compete with me on my gift.
Right. Do you
But
know something? Sorry, I always do this. I want to
yeah,
butt in. I didn't know that gift was there because the thing is, for you or for me, that quality, that power that you have, that superpower you have, if you've lived with it, you can't actually really identify it.
no, it's hard.
And
It's
so
very difficult.
until someone actually starts to identify, you actually have to start listening for the signals and listen to people go, oh,
Yes.
oh, you do this really well. And at first, you all of the things that I was really good at, I didn't really realize. It was only over time that I started to pick up that people were using similar phrases. They were asking me for similar things.
Yeah,
And so, for those that are watching, the encouragement is probably in line with yours. Is don't panic at the beginning if you don't know that
for
you have a
sure. Yeah.
superpower. You have it. It's
Yeah.
there. It's just that
Yeah.
you haven't yet recognized it, and you just have to tune in. You have to listen. Um, Sometimes go to people and ask them, "But why me?" Out of interest.
Why me?
Uh,
Yeah.
why me? And it may not be family, right? It may
Yeah.
not be your best friend, because but there's always a reason. And sometimes when I started to check, all of a sudden I realized, oh, Simeon's unique selling point isn't how good and beautiful the images are crafted. I
Right.
thought that my skill was how good my
Yeah.
imagery looked, how good the lighting looked, how good my framing was. No, it was the fact that I took something that would normally be boring and I made it engaging. I took something that was complex and I made it simple. I took something that people were apathetic toward and I made people care. That was the unique selling point. I just
That's
didn't
it.
know it.
Yeah, and I love how you touched on that because you have to listen. You have to really kind of tune in. It's almost like that frequency. You got to find that right frequency to it, and then be able to say, "Oh, okay, okay, I'm hearing it. I'm hearing it. There it is. There it is," and make sure and get it real crystal clear. And I didn't discover mine until a few years ago. I didn't realize that I just kind of always did these things, and then I kind of thought the same thing where it's like, oh, people are getting or hiring me for this or involved with me for this. When all in all, it was because of my real gift, of that creativity, that motivation to punch through and how I articulate ideas. I'm very good at articulating ideas, to be able to get it across to the masses and get people to follow. On that. And it kind of creates these other things that, then I look back, I'm like, oh, that's why I was, had some success in music. That's why I had some success in IT. That's why I had some success as a business owner. That's why I'm able to do these events. That's why I'm able to speak. That's why I'm able to, because of that ability. I mean, that's truly what it is. I love that. And I definitely think this is like a campaign for you, man. This is like, this needs to be some kind of like marketing thing, for Revita, where, you're kind of taking something that is massive and then making it just small. And what's interesting about that is that means the spaces, once again, you could cross against all different types of spaces because you just have a very interesting and compelling delivery method, of how to interact with it. But that could be other things as well down the road. That's why I love that the opportunities are absolutely endless for you because that's the whole world's problem is taking something very complex and making it very simple.
Yes.
And people either spend a lot of time, energy, and money on trying to figure that out in all different sectors.
And so the way Vivida's brand is being created is so that should we decide to tackle multiple subjects, you'll
Yeah.
notice if anyone looks and Vivida, you'll notice that whilst we continue to refine the messaging and articulate how we do things and why, not the why, but how, there's a color strip, and each color in the color strip represents an option of us tackling a different issue, a different subject. The green for
Oh,
sustainability. We haven't done that yet, but we could, right? We're just
yeah.
acting on we're acting on blue and we're acting on orange, which is security and safety, and also using it to change culture with regards to diversity inclusion.
Yes.
At the
Yeah.
same time, um, it can be very, very difficult if you start to tackle too many things too quickly.
For sure.
One, because of resource, the other because of time, other because your messaging, how you're perceived. Sometimes you could go, my problem is to make the complex simple, but it can become very difficult to scale from a business and entrepreneurial
Correct.
perspective. So I
Correct.
choose a lane or two,
Yeah.
and the aim is to dial down, to refine, to recognize the patterns, to see what works, what approaches, to then decide, do I then scale out?
Yeah.
Also, can I feel as passionate about some of those other areas?
Some of those other, yeah.
Or how do we make sure that as a team and as an organization, as we grow, that same what comes from my heart can be transferred into cultural values and into activity that manifests itself in a way that has the correct impact in the right
Right.
ways for for various organizations. I love spending time thinking about that, but I also have to control myself as well. And I know that there will be a number that are watching that will also be like, oh, and it's this, and I could do this and have this. But the key bit that you recognize, as you mentioned, Jamal, is having a sight on the size and the scale of how of the impact and where this could go. There's a
Yeah.
time for everything and there's a season for everything, and I'm really excited by moving through those seasons.
Yeah. It's gonna be something special, man. I got one last question for you, and I'll have you get up out of here. Um, so being an entrepreneur, oftentimes we like to talk about always the good things. What what have been some of the hardest challenges as an entrepreneur that you've had to endure? I know for myself, it's actually kind of just touched on it. Scaling too fast. I think that is one issue. Not planning ahead. I know in the very beginning of my business, year two, I actually I was actually finally starting to get some decent clientele. I was starting to build up. I was very focused just into video production at the time, and I I didn't plan for the winter. It's basically what happened. So all my clients kind of stopped. I had a lot of one-off projects, and they all stopped. So then there was like 3 months where I literally had like nothing coming in because I didn't plan for like the kind of the seasonal uh part of that business at that time. I mean, of course our business is totally different today, but at that time I didn't plan for that. And so I took a really hard hit. And I remember that was a big wake up call where I'm like, next year I'm never going to have this happen again. So I need to plan ahead, figure out what things to offer, figure out ways to pivot to make sure that even in, especially here in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, we're right next to Chicago. Uh, it gets cold here in the winter. So a lot of stuff doesn't happen unless it's like, seasonal or holiday or, Christmas parties or something like that. And a lot of times people kind of close down their budgets and get ready for the new year. So they're not really wanting to start anything new and different a lot of the time. So I had to take that hard lesson and, basically eat, ramen noodles and just try to get by. But that was a big like wake up call for me. And there were several of those even, in my 7.5 years of business. So what has been some of your challenges, like your toughest challenges that you can kind of give some insight to of what was the problem and then what was the solution that you applied?
Okay, loads, a lot, a lot. Um, okay, so one, I've had big clients before that would literally take 60-70% of your 60-70% of your income. Like really exciting because they scale up, they give you more, you scale the business, but all of a sudden when something happens like now, there might be a change in the economic season, and then they have austerity measures and they can no longer do the activities that you were doing. That happened to me a number of years ago.
Yeah.
And as a result, I had an oh beep moment where all of a sudden overnight it was like the tap turned off.
Oh my God.
And that was terrifying. Fantastic though, because in that moment, that was the moment when I decided to go into virtual reality. I was very depressing because I got that phone call. I was sitting by myself almost by myself in the office. My staff were on holiday, the others were sick, and then I had that phone call. But it was also the moment when I went, let me try something new. I tried VR. I started meddling. I started tinkering. I had nobody around me, and that's when I came up with the virtual reality. Went back into that same client, said, "I've got something to show you." They put the headset on, showed something that I had worked for a few days, including all the way through the night. I stayed up all the way through the night, worked till 7 o'clock in the morning, jumped on the train at 7:30, showed the product, and then the client went, "Well, this is incredible. We need to do something with this." Okay. That was a really scary, like, month and a half, terrifying.
Wow. Wow.
So I get those type of experiences for sure. The peaks and troughs, 100%. They know that a lot often when you start off as small, you are working to bring in business. All of a sudden, the business comes in, and then you're like, "Great, I'm doing it." Then all of a sudden, you finish the project, and you look down and you go, "Oh my gosh, no, there's nothing there anymore," right? So then you start again, and you get that feast or famine. So how do
For
you start
sure.
to move that out? By having constant, continuous activities. The other thing that and that I solved that problem by having people get involved in certain elements of that process to make sure that I have that consistency, even if it meant taking me out of some of the bits that I really enjoy doing, right? The creative parts or the editing, start to delegate some of those key things. Another key one, which I've really realized recently, is self-sabotage. So some of you will find that there are parts of the process of maybe it's servicing a customer that's very painful. When you start to work with large organizations, one of those key things is the onboarding process. An inquiry comes in and they say, love it. You do the demo, say, love it. Then they say, do you have some information? Oh, please. You mean I've got to put together some type of presentation? Or can I come up with a creative brief of how I would tackle this?
Right.
Okay, so I'll have to do that. Then all of a sudden they say, yes, I like it. And then they tell you, here's 20 forms that you now need to fill out. Oh, not all over again. Don't want all of that. So then the idea, what you want to do is to work at the end. But the idea of getting more inquiries is horrible because there's too much pain attached to getting those inquiries.
Yeah.
So what do? You make sure that you don't sell too much. You don't bring in too much business, not because you can't manage the end result, but because there are parts of that process that fill you with dread that you don't like. And because you're your own boss, you can decide that you don't do those things. But as a result, what happens is you end up not pushing yourself, not working, not scaling the team, because you associate getting work and business not with reward and delivering for the customer,
Right.
but with the pain of going through certain parts of the process. So I now start to identify that, and I start to find individuals in the team to fill those gaps.
Yeah.
Or I share those issues I have with colleagues in the team who go, oh, do you know something? I think I could help you with this.
Right.
And so this week was one of those weeks.
Yeah.
So as an example, I was heavily involved in the 3D development of the characters and the 3D worlds we've been building to get the aesthetic that's a standard that the leader requires. And to do that, as the business grew, I started to do that in the evenings from 6 o'clock till maybe 1 in the morning. And then I would also do that all through the weekend. Getting a new project, you're like, oh no, please, because I can now see more weekends, more such and such. The moment I employed somebody in that role that cost me more, yes, and then another person, the floodgates, I was like, yeah, next one, no problem. Then I just employ somebody else and it scales. This week, doing a proposal, like large organization said, Simeon, we want you to come up with a creative execution on such and such. And I sent me off into a dark place of being, I love coming up with the idea, but I hate presenting it, creating, all of the pricing and the breakdown. And all of that.
Yeah, it's a whole process. It's kind of an art.
It's an art. So the moment I see an inquiry come in from another organization, came today, what happened? Oh, not again. Not another inquiry that wants to work with Avida and change the world. What's wrong with that picture?
Yeah.
Right? And so I now have to work to go, I've identified another bit that's causing me pain that I now need to start to find a way of overcoming. And that's one of the reasons that our business model has changed. What we were doing is we were responding to lots of creative briefs from lots of organizations that are saying, Simeon, Vivida, what's your take on this? What we do now is we say, we understand this subject. We're going to create this in our way. We're going to invest the time in our way. This is our way of doing it. Now, all the presentation material is more or less the same because we're selling the same service. We understand the language. We've got the same presentation. So when an inquiry comes in, we go, here we go.
Yep.
When we need to do a demonstration, here we go.
Take it off the shelf. Here you go.
There we go. So understanding that and looking out for some of those things, trying to recognize them and seeing what you can do to adjust the business to work well for you as an individual, but also just make sure that you are not the bottleneck, you're not that restriction in the business as well, is really key. And that requires some self-reflection.
Yeah, 100%. And I think you just described a few different things that, especially in kind of the early, and I say early parts of entrepreneurship, but really it's any part of the entrepreneurship journey, because even if you've been in business for 20 years, if you haven't recognized even the three things that Simeon just said, you're going to constantly be rerunning in these problems. And a lot of times, as an owner of a business, you want to be the operator and you want to control everything. And because he's like, oh, no one can do it like me. No one has this mind to do it like this. We all get caught in it. It's not something to be ashamed of because we all get caught in it. But the real magic is when you can discover those pain points and be able to drop somebody in and say, but this person loves doing that part of it. And I can then stay into my strengths and my gifts. So identifying kind of those weaknesses or those pain points within the business and being able to say, hey, let's find somebody that loves to do that part of it. And what that does is it creates scalability. So that way you can actually do it. And then also I loved how you talked about refining, because in the creative space, there's a lot of people I talk to that are in the creative kind of space of business, and they're constantly trying to come up with new things. It's just new things all the time. And I love the idea of packaging and saying, this is what we do. This is what we do. Do you want to do it? Shake hands, yes or no. Do you want to do it? If not, then this may not be, we may not be the right fit here.
Absolutely.
And I love that because it package, and then you can get real good at delivering that package every single time. And of course, yes, there's exceptions to every rule, but it's about having that core and not being a creative that will just create anything. It's about being a creative that is honed in on your art and that honed in on your ability to be able to provide something that has impact, again and again and again and again. So I love everything that you were talking about, man. I feel like I could talk to you for hours. There's just so much similarities. And that's kind of what I felt even from, kind of watching your videos. And I remember I dropped you an email. It's a few years ago. And you actually responded. You said, yeah, hey, I appreciate it. And gave me a quick reply. And I was like, wow, you actually, normally people don't respond. So it was kind of cool that you took the time out and responded. And I was like, yo, I'm actually learning something from this guy. Like he's got a lot of, similarities to me. And I would love to
be on the look, man. I was like, oh, I like this. I like this. I like this. I mean, all I need is the cap, dude.
All you need is the hat, man. The hat is my signature. That's
I won't take that. I won't take that.
Any business meeting with the hat, man. And people are like, oh, that's Jamar. They can spot me out in the crowd.
Yeah, we need to get you a cap with a you know, JM on there. Get you some more branded versions of the hats. I'll be buying one of those.
I'm always branded, man. I'm always branded.
I love it.
So,
I love it.
I really appreciate your time, man. You know, for sharing a lot of this wisdom and knowledge. Definitely let people know where they can find you. I know we've been dropping them out throughout the podcast, but let people, you know, for audio purposes as well, let people know where they can find you.
Sure. So you can find me at Simeon Quarrie, Simeon, and then Quarrie is Quarie, and that's on most social media platforms. I'm most active on LinkedIn, is where I'm most active, but I'm also responsive on others as well. So thank you very much for listening. I want one of those hats, right? I want a Forever Media hat. Okay.
Awesome. I'll take you up on that.
Nice.
Yeah, we'll definitely chat here briefly after this, because I will definitely be coming out to London at some point this year. So I've been planning a lot of different things with people where I want to, you know, have some kind of cohesive event out there in London, and be able to network and connect. So we'll talk about that, but you know, get you your hat. So it sounds good. Awesome. Well, thank you everybody for listening and watching the Forever Podcast. Please drop a like, a comment, and definitely subscribe also to the channel and everywhere that we are on, and all our streaming platforms as well. And don't forget that, you know, really you can ultimately change your circle to change your life. I mean, you heard it here first and foremost. So many different applications that think about this as you're applying these things that you've learned here today. But the more you can soak up that knowledge, the more you can, you know, be able to pivot and change. You never know what's going to hit and what's going to be your moment. And I think I just watched a video that Rick Ross he had popped up on TikTok, and he's like, you only got to hit once. You only got to hit it once. And he's like, that people think that, you know, it's like this, you know, if you've been failing for 20 years, that all of a sudden, like, you're a failure. That is not true. You only have to hit once. And once you're on that lane, everything can change for you. So thank you so much, everybody, for listening and watching, and we'll catch you on the next episode. Peace. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And don't forget to hit that notification bell for more amazing content that we're going to be putting out. And don't forget, you can change your circle to change your life.